Hi guys, this is Chelsea with Westwood Music. I just wanted to take a moment to do this week's video on prepping for any kind of design modification you like to make to your own guitar. Now I've received a handful of emails over the years addressing this. People want to do it at home to their guitars, or they'd like me to do it. Any kind of design at all, initials. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about prep and painting. Everything you need to know in order to kind of start it at home and then take it to a professional to have it finished, okay? So the first thing you need to know is what you're dealing with when it comes to your guitar. Is it poly or lacquer? There are a few variations in between, such as acrylic, but right now, typically it's poly or lacquer on any guitar. So you'll want to take acetone, okay, and just put it on a Q-tip, really small, after you've taken everything off your guitar body. Then you're going to find some place that's really hidden. It's either going to be right through here or right through here. Make sure you're not totally soaking the Q-tip. You don't need to strip anything. We're just testing to make sure we know what the finish is made of. So you're just going to rub it right through here. This is a good kind of spot. Also, you can do it in a cavity that's hidden by any kind of pick guard or pickup. Okay? Now, if you don't want to buy a huge thing of acetone, you can go to a beauty supply store and get acetone nail polish remover. That'll work. Make sure it's not the acetone free, because that will not work. If you notice that your finish is softening with the application of acetone, then it is lacquer. If it's not, then chances are it is poly or some kind of poly compound. Okay? When you know that, then you'll kind of know what the steps are in order to prep and paint your guitar for a finish. I like to tell people to use a 600 grit. This is kind of a sticky 600 grit. You don't have to use sticky, but I also prefer kind of a soft caul, you know, a little thick rubber, or a block with, you know, just any kind of soft material. This happens to have cork. I don't like to have cork around a lot of the stuff I work on, so I've taped it off, kind of making it waterproof as well. I'm going to just put the 600 on. The reason I kind of want it to be a soft caul is because I'm not trying to sand it even. I just want to kind of break up the top coat, and if there's curves involved in that, that's okay. So I'm not trying to, you know, knock off any kind of points. So I like to just go into kind of a circular pattern. Now, if this was lacquer, what I'd be doing is just the area I'm going to be painting. The circular pattern, that's all you want to do, just the area you're painting. Now if it's poly, what I'd be doing is actually the whole top, because if we talk about the difference between a poly finish and a lacquer finish, when you're finishing over top of something that's already been sprayed, the poly finishes kind of sit on top of each other like this, where lacquer, it kind of reforms and configures and interlocks again. So when you're dealing with poly, and you're talking about overspray, the blending line is always a concern, which is why you need to spray over the whole entire thing again. With lacquer, the blending line, the new lacquer breaks down the old lacquer composition, and it kind of it has a nice fade, so you don't have to worry about that harsh line. So this is poly. So I'm just going to help myself and sand this. Making sure to knock my sandpaper clear. So it doesn't take a lot of time. I'm kind of, when I'm sanding, just making, you can think of little puzzle pieces with all these scratches, so that when the next layer of poly goes on it as a top coat, it kind of interlocks each other. You can use a 400 grit to sand. I don't find it too necessary to go that coarse, but again, if that's all you have, go for it. Then you'll always need to start with a clean surface. So you just clean water, nothing special. And right now you also want to make sure your hands are really clean. You don't want any kind of oil to get in between the two coats of clear. This being your base coat of clear, and then the finish coat being your second coat. So that's going to be how we sand it. Now, the next thing that we're going to cover is going to be the type of paint you use. I don't mind when somebody brings me a guitar that has a medium body acrylic being used, or a thin bodied acrylic. Anything that's thicker than that is going to actually hinder how many layers of that final coat of finish that you put on. We've already decided that this is going to have a charcoal gray design. When you go to mix your color, this is going to be a bit too thick. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just take a bit of water and mix it in. You're not going to need a lot. You just want to make sure that the paint goes on thin enough, because as thick as the design's going to be is as thick as you're going to need that top layer finish. So I always wet my brush before I go, and then I dry it off. And then you start with your design. Now I typically don't ever tell somebody that they have to use a certain type of brush. I find that if you know your tools, no matter what they are, that that's the most important thing. To know what lines you're going to make. Now if we're just going to go for a simple design like this, you can always have fun with different shapes. Okay, simple but effective. Now, if you take a look at this, you might see a few kind of peek throughs when it comes to the paint, because I don't want it too thick. That's okay. I'd rather it dry and put a few coats of thin on instead of one totally thick coat of paint. So we're going to let it dry. Now the other reason why I like to use acrylics is because it's fairly forgiving, not only when it's wet but when it's dry also. So you want to take fairly warm water, not boiling, but a little warmer than what you would consider bath water. And you just want to set it on, whatever you don't want. And it's just going to start breaking down the acrylic. Now this being said, it's forgiving when you're at the when you're designing something, but when it comes to spraying finish, you also have to be careful too, because it is water based and solvents will break it down a lot easier than something else. So maybe you have a shadow design still left. That's okay. You can either choose to scrape it off, right? Or you can take a little bit more sandpaper and just sand it off as well. Now when you're going to clean up your lines, I typically use a kind of a thin steel razor blade. I tape this off just so I don't cut myself. I try to avoid injury when possible. So there's a bit of fuzz right through here where some free-flowing hairs made some lines, and what I'm going to do is just scrape it off a little bit. Now typically it's better to try and get this paint when it's a little tacky. It still has a tiny bit of its elasticity. But if you wait till it dries, it's okay. It might just skip. The razor might skip, so you'll be out of a line a bit more. Now, if you have just little spots like this, you can just get an X-Acto knife and just take them away like that. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind before you even start the design is where your pickguard's going to be. Now, this one's actually going to get a custom pickguard, so I'm going to make it around the design. After you have sanded it, what you can do is just take a pencil and trace around where your pickguard's going to be, okay? Now, let's say that you got the paint a bit thick in one spot. You want to just cut your 600 into tiny little strips like this. And you're going to put on where you think the heavy spot is and just pull through. You know, you're going to get a little bit on there, but it's not going to be much. Remember, as thick as your design is just as thick as the top coat needs to be. So we want to keep that as thin as possible, and we don't want to sand through it at the end of the day. Once you get the design that you want, you have a few options. If you're going to do this at home, I suggest that you finish everything off with a satin finish, either that be lacquer or poly. If you use a gloss finish and you really want to achieve that look, I suggest you take it to somebody professional. When it comes to a gloss look, you have to realize that between every coat there is sanding that has to happen, and there at the end of the coats there's a process of sanding and buffing, so you get that high gloss. When you use satin, it's very much a spray on for about 6 coats and you're done. Okay? I hope this was helpful. I've received a lot of emails over the years, and I think these are all the tips that I can somehow organize that I've told other people about, and I hope it'll help you out.